Hey fellas, I've been thinking lately a lot about references and the value that they have in a creative work. So I've been reading an awful lot of Ulysses by Joyce. This class I'm taking, we're supposed to read every chapter 3 times, once, and then again with the notes. We've got a whole other book of just notes, and it requires that because and then we read the chapter a third time after having gone through it once with the notes. And I found actually the third time you read a chapter of Ulysses after having read it once and then read the notes, you actually get a much better sense of what is going on. Joyce says things that he didn't say or that you didn't know he was saying. And then now you understand it, you understand what is even going on. So I've been thinking about realism and references and what the value of those references are. The reason a chapter requires all those notes is that it's so dense with references. He'll have a sentence that names like 3 different people that are not characters in the book. They're just historical figures from Irish history or English history or Greek mythology or whatever, or medieval church history even. And then he'll say some other sentence that just doesn't seem to mean anything, and it turns out that, those 3 people participated in like an attack on some prison, and the song, is like a nursery rhyme that if you look at the rest of the lyrics of the nursery rhyme, it makes like an ironic comment on the person that they rescued from prison, or something like that. So the character is, being critical of a particular political movement, in this one sentence with 3 names and then part of a nursery rhyme. And it just, until you get the references, you're just not going to understand that. One thing that references do, so let me define realism really quick. Realism is when what you write and reality correspond. So when you describe something realistically, that's realism. So like realism is useful, say, if your message is something like, don't do drugs, and you describe drugs realistically and then you give that message, it's much more convincing than if you describe drugs like unrealistically and everybody can tell you don't know what you're talking about, and your message, even a work of fiction, even though everybody knows it's a work of fiction, the realism of your description makes it much more convincing than if you don't describe it realistically. Nobody's going to believe the message. So with all of the thing that references do is they are just straight up realism, because they're actually imported from the real world. They're not even fictional, really. They're just pieces of nonfiction inserted into your fictional text. They are as realistic as it could possibly be. So it's very easy to believe that the things that these Irishmen are thinking about in Joyce are what Irishmen would actually be thinking about at that time. Because our thoughts really are full of references, Our thoughts almost sort of are referential in nature, at least to a certain extent. So I've been trying to figure out, what is the value of references and how do you use that in fiction. They're certainly valuable as realism, but does the difficulty that it can cause for your readers mean that it might not be worthwhile to use that technique? Because a lot of people really recognize that Ulysses is a great book, but it's one of those great books that nobody ever reads because it's really very difficult unless you're, an Irishman born in 1890. Anyway, yep.